Good evening to all. I hope you can see me. I hope you can hear me for now. So thank you for joining, for those who are coming for the first time, and thank you for coming back for those who are coming for the second or the third time, as today is my third session, third edition of a live stream on Twitch. So for those who attended the first two sessions, which were 2 weeks ago and last week, then you might see that the decor is not exactly the same as before. I'm now back home, and prior to that, the other two times I was in another place I'd like to call home, which is in Brussels. And now back into my routines, and but also just to make it happen, I have settled a little disk, a study, so I can stream, and you can see me, you can hear me better. It's more probably more comfortable than it would have been otherwise. So today I will discuss matters relating to preparing for your oral defense, whether you are doing a master's degree or a PhD. Sorry about this, I disappeared for a few seconds. So here, when you're on Twitch, when you join a session, remember that the important thing is really interaction. So it is not supposed to be just a monologue where I would give a lecture. What is really engaging, really interesting is if you have questions, if you make comments, and if I can react, if I can interject, and if I can build on those to make the conversation progress. So I will wait a few more minutes until some others may join before we really start. In case there are no set questions, in case there is no real doubts regarding your preparation for your oral defense or whatsoever. Of course, there are a couple of hints and tips I'd like to share with you anyway, and those could concern either the master's thesis or the PhD dissertation. So you will see that there are a number of commonalities between the two, probably because the master's is a threshold to doctoral studies, and perhaps because doctoral studies are a sort of a continuation for research talented and research attracted master's students. So when you do your master's thesis, you are starting with a research project, which is a first step in research, a first foot in the door of research. So I see we are not very many just yet, but we can sort of get started. What I'll do is that I will first expose the process from submission to Viva, to oral defense or Viva. I will use the two terms interchangeably. Viva is usually the British word. Then I will discuss some important issues relating to reviewers, and especially when you are doing a doctorate, you receive comments from reviewers, and you should probably take them into consideration when you prepare for your oral defense. And likewise, I will discuss some matters relating to your presentation itself and relating to time management. So those things that are often blind spots of your preparation. And I will also address issues relating to the questions you could be asked, and not the answer you must absolutely give, but what a number of questions call for reflection, and what level of answer is let's say, expected or required. So, when you do a master's thesis, on the oral defense, you are assessed on a twofold basis. On one hand, you are assessed on your capability of being reflexive on a problem you decide to study in depth. This means you are expected to show that you have been able to take a problem, be it practical, be it theoretical, be it whatsoever, and in so doing, you've been able to go through the academic literature. You've been able to... good evening, Fuad Peter. You're welcome. You need to show that you've been able to collect some empirical data and process this data in a rigorous manner, and that you've been able to derive conclusions and learn lessons from those. That's the general picture. So on one hand, you are assessed on this basis. And on the other hand, you are assessed on the basis of what can come next. For what are you ready after this defense? And you can be ready for two different things. One is ready for the job market, ready for joining industry, so a sufficient reflexive capability, a sufficient strategic thinking, enabling the graduate to be a good professional. Or you might be ready to continue with research. And if you are ready to continue with research, it means that you might be ready for a doctoral program. And this is for the masters. For the doctorate, when you do your oral defense, when you do your oral defense, you are assessed on your, and that's something very important, on your capability of becoming a colleague. On the day of the Viva, if you receive the degree straight ahead, which generally happens, then you are straight ahead a member of this community of doctors, and you are a potential colleague. So here, with your doctoral defense, oral defense, what is assessed is your capability of being a colleague. That's very important. You're not assessed as a student. So, based on this, the process or the journey itself is as follows. So you submit your thesis, and there will be one difference between masters and doctorate at some point, at the beginning, in fact, but everything else is quite similar. So you first submit your thesis, and when you do a master's degree, you have a date set for the Viva, and then you go to the Viva. When you do a doctorate, there is something in between submission and Viva. And what is coming in this in between, g'day Brian, is what we call receive the reports from reviewers. Depending on the country, they can be called differently. They can be called referees, reviewers, opponents, and whatever the name is. They write a report on the thesis. There are usually two of them. Depending on the country, again, they can be two externals. So they can be one internal, one external. And you receive their reports. In the reports, they assess whether you are ready or not to defend and to be considered a potential colleague on the day. This is where the key is. And when you've received those reports, they might articulate a number of potential decisions. One is ready for Viva. As it stands, this is the holy grail. That's the best thing that could happen to you. The second option is just the opposite, not ready at all. Major work is still required. Major work might mean between 6 and 12 months extra work. And then there are two other types of recommendations that can be made in between. One being significant changes, so from 3 to 6 months extra work, let's say major editing. And the other one is minor changes, which are mainly of editorial nature, not as big as with significant, but still requiring effort, 1 to 3 months of work. And this is where it's very important. When you are doing a doctorate, you go to the Viva having received those reports. In those reports, your reviewers might comments, ask questions, also might challenge what you've written, what you think, etc. And what is expected of you is you to be able to take those comments on board on the day. And this is something on which I will insist for a bit of time today. This is when you do a doctorate. When you do a master's, you do not have to bother too much or worry too much about those reports from reviewers. You do not really have reviewers who write a report before going to oral defense. You might have just reviewers writing a report, and this is instead of the Viva. In some countries, it is the case. So what happens? When you are doing your doctorate, you receive those comments, and if you are required to rewrite part or the whole thesis, you have to do it. So you have to really take those comments on board. You have to show that you've understood them. You have to show that you have made significant changes, that even a minor comment, a short sentence, which might sound insignificant when you just read it, might have, as a butterfly effect, major implications for the thesis. So if you just change one thing, then you might need to change something which derives from this in a subsequent chapter, perhaps in a subsequent section, and then the whole thesis is sort of significantly altered. And you have to show that you've been able to do it, to understand it, and to do it. And then, of course, there are some comments that you do not take on board for good reasons, and it must always be for good reasons. A good reason is when you say, "Oh, here so doing would be contradictory with the initial intent or with the overall approach," or you have two reviewers who might be disagreeing on some comments, and at some point you have to make a choice, and then you have to justify why you chose to take a certain direction rather than the other one. And provided it's well justified with academic grounds, with academic arguments, nobody will complain, even the person whose advice has not been followed, provided you say, "Okay, I've not followed your advice because it was conflicting with the other reviewer's advice saying this and that, which was much more aligned with what I'm currently doing," etc. So, but you have to show it in the thesis itself, implicitly for the comments you have not taken into consideration, and in the letter you write to your reviewers. So why am I speaking of this? as tonight I was supposed to speak of the oral defense itself. I'm speaking of this because I do believe that preparing for Viva starts from submission date. When you submit your thesis, and I'm pretty sure a number of you are in this situation, when you submit your thesis, you are in the mindset of defending it soon. If you are in this mindset, then it means that you are preparing for your Viva from that day. And then between that day and Viva, there might be a couple of steps. Like I said, one is this report from reviewer. The other one is how you respond, how do you rewrite the thesis, etc. So far, so good, I suppose. So, now let's say you have written the thesis. It has been resent to your reviewers. They agree that it can be defended. Everything is going well. So, no worries. But what do you do for your presentation? That's the very question. It's always a dilemma, which is, shall I prepare my presentation in light of what I received as comments, or including some of the questions that were asked in the report, or shall I submit or prepare my presentation as if I had not received those reports and as if I were just presenting my native work? So here my advice is that the presentation itself should, as much as possible, rest upon a couple of assumptions. The first assumption is that the panel knows your thesis already. And it's the same for master's students. The panel knows your work. They read it, or they're supposed to have read it, so that you're not expected to give too much background, to give too much detail about everything, about the winds and weather, etc. So where is this thesis coming from? Why am I doing this thesis? What is the context? We do not need this. So it is sort of assumed that people know. You do not need to give so much of the detail of everything about the literature review. Do not need to get too much in depth. So it's really a matter of providing your panel with material for a discussion at the academic level they consider appropriate to admit you to either to their community as doctors, or to admit you as a master, so as a graduate. So you're a master, you command things. So based on this, my advice is then to show that you have understood their comments, and that you integrate them as much as you can into your presentation. That is, rather than necessarily speaking of your initial idea, etc. So at some point in the presentation, you should include some parts of the discussion. And I'm getting there, of course. So it's just to say, the way you structure it, the way you think about it should not be how you want to present your work and how you wanted it to be presented in the first place, but how it can be presented so you engage in a good conversation with the panel. And this rests upon the best possible understanding of what they want, of what they think is important, of what they raised as issues or questions they asked. So here, this means I'll get to this progressively anyway. So when you when you prepare, then this means this means when there are parts of the thesis that are really called into question, or when there are some questions raised by your work, in your work, raised by your reviewers, and left unanswered, the oral defense and presentation are the place where you can start giving an answer, so you show the panel that you've heard their comments and that you have made them yours and included them into your work. And such comments can be on a number of things. So they could be on your research question, in the way it is worded, or your research question raises this or leaves this problem unanswered, or here the definition is loose. Maybe you could rely on what such and such has done, etc. So even if you've not entirely embraced those comments, you can still, or you should still, show that you have worked on them, and you can enrich in your oral defense your definitions, a few notions, a few terms, showing that you've done some more readings as suggested, and you bring them in the conversation. Likewise, they might question your literature review, they might question your theoretical framework, they might question your data and methods, they might question your results, your findings, they might question your contributions, and this is everything you need to consider here, so you bring this. So, more, and I'm getting there slowly. So this is for doctoral. For master's studies, you do not receive reports before Viva, so it's generally either or. So you discover everything on the day. And we'll get to this when I mention the questions and answers and interactions with your panel. When you prepare your presentation itself, your slideshow, here are a few tips and hints that I think are very important. Too often, I've seen students with, still students, be they master's students or doctoral students, I've seen students preparing very, very heavy, crowded slideshows, crowded presentations. The more crowded, the less likely you are to be engaging, the less likely you are to be interesting, and the more likely you are to be boring. Sorry if I'm saying this, but with a crowded slideshow, what do I call a crowded slideshow? It's a slideshow with too many slides and with slides where you have too much text. So, too many slides, the panel does not really have time to see everything and to absorb what is written and to absorb what you're saying. Too crowded with too much text, they're reading, they're not listening. And then as they're not listening, they have no idea what you're saying, even if it's very interesting, even if you show that you understood their comments. Sorry, I need just a bit of water. So, too often I see slideshows that are over 10 slides. It might be 10, 15, 20. I think I even saw one slideshow with 50 slides, which is way too much. Bear in mind that on average you have about 15-20 minutes to present. In some instances, it can go up to 30, but bear in mind that people's attention waves after 10 minutes. So 2 rounds of 10 minutes, so 20 minutes, is probably the maximum people could tolerate. I mean, mentally. If you want to keep them on board, you must be relatively concise and you should not talk for too long. And knowing then that you only have 15-20 minutes, you must be very selective and you must go straight to the point. What does it mean, going straight to the point in your presentation? Well, I would say it is when you start with a very, very brief slideshow where things are very clear. So for me, I mean, of my own experience as first a PhD student years ago, a supervisor, an examiner, a jury or panel convener, a reviewer in a number of countries, I can tell that a good slideshow is a slideshow where you have those slides. First, the thesis title, so we know what it is about. So there might be your name, the date, so a bit of fluff on the first slide is not a problem. Things really start with the next one. So slide 2 should be research question. Slide 3, the gap in the literature, and just a few references if you like, so as to highlight the gap, but nothing more. And slide 4 maybe should be your theoretical framework, not giving the detail of everything, but the name of your theory or the main authors and the key concepts. For some concepts that are difficult or new, a very brief definition, so the audience has an idea of what it means when you use those words. Slide 1, 2, 3. So slide 4 should be your data. So the data you have collected for your thesis, for your work, followed with methods. So methods for collecting and processing data. You do not need to give too much detail. We need to know what type of approach you have adopted. If you do qualitative, we need to know that what you've done. So, okay, I've done interviews and I've processed interviews this way, or I've worked on social media engagements. I've collected publications and social media engagement proof from platforms, blah, 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 over this time period. I've done this way. We need to know in a nutshell, so we understand what you did, and then we do not need to know in detail everything you've done. We need to know the big picture of what your data set was about, so with how many observations, and how it was collected and processed. If you do quants, it's the same. If you do quants, we need to know what data you've used. If you've used a database, which one? If you have collected data through a survey, we need to know a bit about the survey and the population. Not much else. We do not need to see the whole set of questions, of course. Then, slide 6 is on the main results, the main findings. You should not exceed 3 findings. If you have more than 3, assume that your panel will not be able to retain them, will not be able to really remember or understand the whole thing. So the main 3 findings. Then, slide 6, your contributions. What are the main contributions of this work, this thesis or this dissertation? Contributions, here something important you should highlight: contributions to a theory, as, remember, this is a piece of research. So you are contributing to research, supposedly. We are not expecting in the first place other types of contribution than those to research. So you should be very clear with this. Then optional is one slide with areas for further research, but it's optional because you can talk about it without necessarily having a slide on it. And here with this, you've got 6 or 7 working slides, which means if we split it and time it, which means that the slide on the research question will be very quick. So when you expose your research question, you briefly explain why it matters to you, why it might matter for some practitioners, and why it matters for research. Then you need to also highlight, so this might be very quick. So in 1 minute or 2 minutes maximum, it should be done. Then the gap in the literature. The gap in the literature, you highlight just in a nutshell the main streams of thought on the topic. In a nutshell, what is known and what has been left unknown, or where they disagree and where there is a disagreement and room for new knowledge. And then you highlight where you fit within this conversation. Again, this does not need to be very lengthy. This can be 2 or 3 minutes maximum. More than 3 minutes is too long. Then we come to your theoretical framework. Theoretical framework starts being something that really matters here. So remember, you've already spent 5 minutes maximum. Research question and gap in the literature. You still have 15 minutes to go and quite a bit to say, right? So here, theoretical framework, you need to articulate as clearly as possible what it is. So just name it if it has a known name. Give the main concepts and their interactions and what you expect of it. And this can take up to 5 minutes, but 3 is better. 3 minutes is better because what is important is what is really important to you is what comes next. So data, methods, and findings. Then data and methods should be quick as well. So on data, you should not exceed more than 2 minutes, just explaining the data you've collected. For the methods, it should be something alike, so 2 or 3 minutes. It might be a bit more if you have a novel or original methodology here. And next is where you might need to spend a bit of time is with your main findings. Usually this is where you are especially excited, and this is where you really have something original with your findings. So like I said, do not have too many findings. So one slide with your main 3 findings, and then you can spend, you can spend 3 minutes on each. So which means in total up to 10 minutes. Then next is your discussion. And in your discussion, contributions. Here, this is where you are selling the interest of your thesis. Why were you right, reading it through, going to the end, and why were you right, listening to me today? So this is what you need to show. And here, brief is good as well. So up to 3 minutes maximum. And therefore, when I mentioned areas for further research, is it necessary or not? For me, you do not need to have a slide for it. You do not need to. So if you really want to, you can. Then, do you need a final slide? Thank you for your attention. I never do it. I each time I see it, it makes me smile a bit and thinking, yeah, okay, it's quite predictable and conventional. So, as you see, a limited number of slides and on average 3 minutes on each and up to 9 minutes on your findings. Not more. Then on each slide, I would say just go for either some keywords, some key names, some key figures, or when I say figures, I mean numbers, but it can be graphs, it can be pictures, things that must be displayed and that cannot be easily explained using words, just using words. And here, let me share an experience which is not related to Viva, but it was in a course when I was teaching geopolitics. And I was teaching geopolitics, and it was at the time of the start of the war between Ukraine and Russia. And my students were very nervous, and they wanted to understand more about this, what's happening, how come, etc. I was not especially prepared for this, so I had all the materials, so I could speak about it. It was not a problem in itself. But I did not have a map of Russia and Ukraine. So I didn't have this to display. So I'll let you imagine how easy it was explaining to students, well, look here, imagine on the wall, you've got Russia, right? And here just at the bottom, you've got something called Ukraine. And here you've got the Black Sea. And here you've got the Caspian Sea. Just difficult. Difficult. With the map displayed on the screen, it would have been so much easier. I would not have needed to describe things using too many words or making things overly complex. But then, when I taught Russia's politics or Russia's international policy, I only needed 2 or 3 slides because it was only maps showing some changes in Russia's positions, but I did not need more than 3 maps, and I could do something that would last for up to 3 hours, because what is needed, what you need to display is what is necessary only. So no need to add any fluff, any extra stuff which is not helpful. This will play against you if you do. So very important. But then, what I always suggest my students should do is, after their final slide, I suggest they prepare extra slides where they start answering the questions they had in the reports. So if you remember, I mentioned the reports you receive prior to Viva from your reviewers, and they never say, oh, good for submission, so good for defense, full stop. No, they always have questions. They always have, let's say, tricky questions. They always make suggestions, and this means I want this to be discussed. And of course, when you go to the Viva, you cannot go unprepared for this. This means if they say, there is a very interesting book, it may be useful, or this paper, blah, 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 it means you must read it, you must be clear with it, and on the Viva day, you must be ready to speak about it, of course. And you can be certain that a number of the questions in the report will be asked directly, unless you've already answered them at least partly in the presentation, like I said before. If you have already answered partly or fully those questions, new questions will arise. But if you have not, then those questions will arise. You can be certain there will be. So that I always suggest my students, they should have, let's say, a slide with some bits that would help them answer the question asked by the review, by the panel member, and this is something very helpful, because when the question comes, then you say, oh yes, here it is, you show, and then you can talk about it, talk over your slide and talk about the question itself, and it's always appreciated and always helpful. So this means you you need to be very clear with those questions. Do not really leave them unattended, especially when new readings are suggested. Remember, there might be quite a bit of time between submission day and Viva day, and in between, we assume that you might have time to do some more readings, to think more about your work and about other people's work. Something else very important for your preparation is that you should read what your panel has written on the topic. So you sort of know what is of interest to them, and you can also anticipate some questions they will ask you on the Viva day. And here I can give you a couple of examples. On my own Viva, when I was defending my PhD, I had as reviewer Eve Chiapello. She is one of the greatest sociologists in the world, and she is very interested in capitalism. So she co-authored with Luc Boltanski best-selling book, The New Spirit of Capitalism. And I knew that she would be especially interested in some demographics, in some sociological features of the population I studied in my thesis, which was on ethnicity in the Salvation Army. And I also know that she was very interested in a sort of colonization of NGOs and churches by a capitalist spirit, and I knew that she would probably challenge me on this, just as a matter of intellectual interest of hers. So I had known her already for a while. I had already interacted with her way before. I had already read her works, but I read her more recent publications so as to know more about her current interests and where her interest might have slightly shifted, so I could anticipate a number of questions she would ask me. My other reviewer, Anthony Berry from Manchester, was a former aeronautical engineer, but very, very passionate about philosophy, and he loved French theory. So I knew that there would be a discussion on French theory and on theorizing, and on how I could theorize from my data. So I prepared sort of an interaction with him. Likewise, I had known him from before. I had met him before he was appointed as a panel member. So I had read his works. I was not discovering it for the first time, but I needed to know more about his more recent interests. And something very funny was that I used as my theoretical framework one of his writings. It was a paper he published a couple of years prior to my defense. So actually, the paper was published when I started my PhD. And I remember in his report, he said that he was very surprised and flattered to see that someone would use his own work as a theoretical framework. And but I also knew that he was someone tough regarding the way people appropriate his own work. So I had to be prepared to questions challenging the way I had been using his work. the why had been ascribing him a number of thoughts or intentions or whatsoever. So I was prepared indeed, and it went well, of course. Likewise, when I am an examiner, so I never ask questions that are, let's say, traps, or I never ask questions students cannot anticipate. But if the student works on something close to my own interest, at some point I will ask questions in relation to my own work, not to make sure my work was read. I don't care about this. No, just to think about my own work. Okay, so here you're saying this, I've written this and that. So if you had considered this theoretical framework or my approach, how different would it be, or how do you think your work could influence mine? So something like this. So this means you must know your reviewers, your panel members' research, so you can interact with them when they ask you questions. It is not an examination per se, it is a quest for a valuable spokespartner, academic spokespartner. And this is the key here. We want an academic spokespartner. So for me, it's key that you read their work, that you know them. They're very important. So once you've done this, you can be certain that you are able to respond to most of their comments, written comments, and answer most of their oral questions that are, for most of them, already in the written report for the PhD or DBA. For the masters, it's still important reading their work so you know what is of interest to them. Again, you show that you know what they're doing, and you show that you can interact with them, and that you are able to speak the same language. Then something else that can occur is are questions relating to what you have said, or things you have not said actually in your defense, in your Viva. And here, when you've got such questions, it usually means that you have answered their important questions. So the most important questions they were asking in their reports, so they've been addressed already. So now they have more questions on what you've said, they want to know more about what you've done, about how you've done things, why you've done this way rather than a different way. And here, again, no traps. A threshold to a conversation, to an academic conversation. So, then there are a couple of questions that might be tricky at some point. Some tricky questions, especially when you do not expect them, are questions on such as, but you're addressing this research question, but this question has already been addressed by many people before. So why is it still worth doing it today? Why should we read this thesis addressing this well-documented question? So you must be very prepared for that if your research question is eventually well-documented. Or you might have questions relating to your data and methods, saying, here I'm not sure what you exactly did, so there is sort of a lack of clarity or transparency as to how you collected or processed your data. Here I do not really understand the test you conducted, or here I do not really understand your coding. Please tell us more. So here they highlight two things. One is their need to understand, and they highlight a weakness of yours. And the second thing they highlight is an interest, a personal interest in what you're doing, and I want to know more. So, and another very tricky question they can ask relates to your not findings per se, to your contributions. What at times happens, and it's the worst, is, okay, interesting, but so what? So what? This means, what lessons should we learn from this thesis? To whom should it be appealing? For whom should it be of any interest? What can be done out of it? If you're asked this question, this means that you failed either in the written document or during your presentation. You failed to show your contributions. And in this case, it is not a trap per se, but what's important is that you manage to respond. And something else that comes to my mind right now regarding Viva, be it master's level or doctoral level, is that, like I said many times, it is a conversation. You engage, you interact with your panel, and it's not expected you to be defensive. You're not there to justify yourself. Like, oh, my intention was blah, blah, blah. Oh, I've done this, but blah, blah, blah. No, we're not there for that purpose, for that reason. What is done is done. Full stop. Now, the question is, okay, here is what you've done. There are weaknesses where I do not quite agree. Had you done differently, what do you think the results could be? Or when you decided this, have you considered other options? So when you chose this theoretical framework, I may agree or disagree, does not matter, but when you've chosen this theoretical framework or this model, you left others aside. What do you think those other frameworks could have brought to you now? If you had chosen them, what do you think conclusions would be? So this is the type of discussion. This is what they want you to show them, that you are able not to say, oh, I did this way because, but saying, okay, I've not done a different way. I've done this particular way, but had I done a different way, then I've thought about it, and you show that you have. And at some point, it is implicitly understood that a decision must be made, that you cannot do everything. So you have to choose to make a decision and commit to it. And nobody will blame you for that. But people will blame you if you justify yourself, if you are defensive, and they will blame you if you are not able to show that you understand or know beyond what you've done. That's what is here critical to oral defense, be it at master's or doctoral levels. That's were the main things that came to my mind in relation to the defense itself. There was something else I wanted to add. It just it's just blown away, but it will come back. It will come back. There was something else I wanted to say. Gosh, whatever. It will come back. Then a few more words on what comes next. So, when you defend for a master's degree, generally the Viva is an hour, with, like I said, about 15-20 minutes presentation, about 30, 40 minutes discussion with the panel, and then when you vacate the room, the panel deliberates, makes the decisions, so writes a brief note and give you a mark. For a doctoral degree, it is a bit different. It is open-ended. So it starts at the set time and it finishes when it finishes. This means that I saw a number of vivas. So when I was the director of the Grenoble École de Management doctoral school, I convened a number of vivas, and the shortest was 1 hour, the longest was 4. The shortest was 1 hour with the student having a very clear dissertation without many questions. So it does not mean that the dissertation was especially good. So some were very good, some others were very average. When there are no questions, it does not mean that the thesis is very good. It might mean that we do not know what to ask. So it's quite mainstream, quite well known already. So there's nothing really original. We do not really know. But conversely, there might be a thesis where everything is so good, you do not know what to ask. Okay, any question I could have has been answered. So yeah, so it can be quick. 4 hours was with and can be either with very good or very bad thesis. I still remember what I wanted to add, and I'll get back to this soon. So 4 hours could be either very good or very bad. Very good, it's when the discussion is so engaging, so stimulating that the panel members want to know more, and then they really engage in a conversation with the student, and progressively I've noticed the conversation is less and less on the thesis itself, on the content of the thesis itself, but goes much beyond and tends to revolve around research more generally, or around the extensions of this thesis, where it can lead, etc. And and then at some point, the convener has to decide to stop. So okay, now it's over. Now we can continue over snacks and drinks, or over lunch or dinner or whatever. It can be also for a bad thesis. I was a reviewer for a thesis which was terrible, and the viva lasted for 3 hours precisely because the thesis was not good at all, and we had doubts that the student was really, let's say in politically correct terms, we were not sure that the candidate had a good command of what she wrote in the thesis. Now, politically incorrect, we had serious doubts that the thesis was written by the student. We had the intuition that it might have been outsourced to someone else, and we needed to push the student as far as we could so as to detect whether our intuitions were confirmed or not. And when the student said something, it was often elusive or contradicting something else she said somewhere else, and then we said, "Oh yes, but here you mentioned this, and here now you're saying this. What is the point? Blah blah blah." So we're really trying to track anything that could confirm this intuition that she was not the right author. So this takes me to the point I wanted to make before, and which I forgot, and I apologize for this, which is on the viva, be it for a master's thesis or a doctoral dissertation, we are ascertaining that you are the author of this work and that you have a good command of everything you've written. So until I'd say 2023, there was often a suspicion, not often, but at times it happened that we suspected that the student might have paid a ghostwriter for the thesis, so to write the thesis in his or her stead. And when you see this, how can we have this intuition? We can have this intuition when when it is obvious that the student presenting does not know the content of the thesis. During the presentation, it happens that students present and have not even read what the ghostwriter wrote for them. I witnessed this once. That's the worst case scenario. Another scenario is when the student presents and it's clear, but when he asks questions, answers are often elusive, evasive, not really addressing the point, often off topic or very convoluted. And then you can feel that, no, there's something wrong. There is something wrong. I'm asking a clear, simple or relatively clear question, and I've got a weird answer. I do not know what the student eventually answered. No, there's something wrong. And this was, until 2023, a big concern. So making sure that the thesis was eventually written by the student and not by a ghostwriter. Nowadays, 2 years on, with the advent of generative artificial intelligence, there are more and more suspicions, and often true suspicions, eventuated suspicions, that a thesis was partly or in full written by generative AI. Here, I would say, for most of you, you should not worry too. Well, yes, you should not worry too much. But yes, sorry. And actually, what I wanted to say is, of my experience of this, now, at the doctoral level, there is no big concern, because the advent of generative AI and the progress made by ChatGPT 4 and 6, 6 was released this week, and not speaking of 5, which is problematic, but 4 and 6. With the advent of ChatGPT 4 in April and ChatGPT 6 on the 27th of August, 3 days ago, it is indeed possible to have a thesis generated in full or in part by generative AI writing good things, but, and it's a big but, the key is the quality of the prompt. Before ChatGPT 4, even with a good prompt, it would be clear that the thesis was generated by AI. Now, you need a very good prompt, and a good prompt is something that you need to learn, and it takes weeks or months to learn how to prompt well. So, for now, with doctoral theses, which are being submitted or defended soon, I have no worries that there would be any suspicion of generative AI use. So this is something very important for doctoral thesis now. For master's thesis, as the time frame for writing them is shorter, indeed there may be suspicions. I've heard of students who wrote their bachelor's thesis with generative AI. It was very easily detected because they did not know how to prompt correctly, to prompt well. And I'm not getting back to this right now, as I spoke of this last week, and the video is on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. So I will not re-explain what I said last week. But I wanted to say with generative AI, there will be a growing concern from now for theses that were started after 2022. So from 2023 on, there will be concerns for elder theses. Not really. So you should be quite relieved with this. Then, like I said, so I'm back to the process itself. So the end now. I spoke of the masters. So what happens? So the student vacates the room. Now for the doctorates. For the doctorate, what happens is that usually, well, it depends, of course, but the tradition is that that the panel retires. They retire into a deliberation room and they discuss. And what you've got in the panel, you've got a convener, you've got your two reviewers or referees or opponents. You might then have you might have your supervisor, but your supervisor is not part in the decision. Your supervisor is there as someone being your guardian. But in some instances, in some countries or in some programs, your supervisor is not on the panel when they discuss, when they deliberate. So the panel retires, and the ones making the decision are the two reviewers. The two reviewers and the convener writes the report, the joint report of the post-Viva report. And it is this report which is very important for your career if you want an academic career. So the joint report, or the final report after you defend it. So here what is important to know is that your supervisor is not influencing the decision at all. The convener, who is generally the head of the program or head of school, is not either able to influence the decision. He or she is there to make sure that the decision is consistent with what the reviewers wanted. This means you really have to please the reviewers. From the day you receive their first report until your Viva day. This is what is really, really key. And after this deliberation, they come back to the room, or if they had to ask the student and the audience to vacate the room, then they call them back in. And once you're back in, they tell you what the decision is. Of course, there are exceptions, but generally, so 90% of the cases, 95% of the cases, when you defend your thesis, your dissertation, you have the quasi-guarantee that you will be pronounced a doctor on the day. Therefore, the process before you submit is very tough and very demanding, because we know that you will certainly be a doctor once you defend. And when they pronounce you a doctor, they pronounce you So with some comments, and the comments are generally a synthesis of what is in the report and some recommendations for what is coming next. They can commend you for certain rewards, certain awards, certain distinctions, or whatsoever. And this is, I would not say the moment of truth, but the big relief. At times, they might give you a temporary or a facsimile of your degree, of your diploma, if some minor changes are still required, but very minor. So you're a doctor, but conditional. So conditional doctor. So which means you are. But so this is the right moment, the best moment probably. And what I wanted to add here was that your panel deliberates, and it might take time. It might take time not because they disagree or whatever. They do not go through everything you've written, through everything you've said. No, it's not this. They share their overall impression on your work, on your talk, on your interactions. They also try to see what you could do afterwards. They try to choose the right words for the report, so it's really fair on their impression, etc., etc. So this is what takes a bit of time. And there's also some paperwork they have to fill out, and this takes a bit of time. It does not mean that a long deliberation is a problem. It just means they have a lot to write and talk about. So this is the main things I could share as such for now. But of course, a live on Twitch, is supposed to be something interactive. So I've been looking at the chat from the beginning and not seen any questions, any remarks or whatsoever. So I knew what I would like to share in case there were no questions. But please, if there is anything I've not discussed, or if there are any questions you have in mind, please do ask. I'm more than happy to answer as well as I can. So I see nothing. Okay, perfect for Peter. If I could cover your main questions, this was the purpose. This was the point, actually. And now I can also share a few other thoughts as a reviewer when I receive a thesis. When I receive a thesis to assess, I'm always doing it voluntarily and benevolently. So I'm always happy to help the community and to help future doctors. It is true that when I receive a thesis which is either very short or very long, I might be a bit annoyed at the beginning. When the thesis is very short, my first impression is how come the supervisor has allowed submission? There must be things missing. How can a short thesis be good? How can a doctoral thesis, or even a master's thesis, a doctoral which is too short, be good? How can there be a decent literature review? How can there be a clear decent methodology chapter? How can there be decent empirical findings or results if the thesis is short? And when you start with this impression, it is not good for the student, because you are not well disposed on the students. And you start with a big bias, which is this thesis is not by the standard. And then anything you read in the thesis, which another thesis could be sort of okay, then can be a nuisance for you. You might think, I knew it. Okay, he's saying this. Okay, I knew it. And it's not good. Conversely, when the thesis is very long, I'm saying this, and I'm the worst position to speak about this, and you will know why very soon. When a thesis is too long or very long, my first thought is that it might be verbose. It might be too wordy, and it could have been made simpler. It might be convoluted. I'm saying this, but I'm, like I said, not the best person to say this. My own PhD thesis was 140,000 words, and I think that at that time, 80,000 words was sort of the norm. So it was nearly twice the length. So I had two volumes, one for the thesis and one for the annexes. So I had 500 pages each, or 380 pages for the thesis and 500 pages for the annexes. I also supervised a number of students to whom I always said, write as much as you think is necessary. Do not worry about word count. Do not worry about word limit. And I have one student who wrote a wonderful thesis, probably one of the best. And this thesis was very, very lengthy. It was lengthier than mine. I think it was 160,000 words, whilst the norm, the standard was about 50 with a tolerance for 70. And he was asked to cut nearly 2/3. I'll let you imagine how hard it's been for him. But I also let you imagine how the reviewers might have reacted when they received the thesis, thinking, how long will it take me reading it? But for me, nearly everything in the thesis was worth it. It could have been defended without shortenings. But this was a requirement. So a thesis which is too long or too short, a thesis where the text is convoluted, is a thesis which can be very annoying for a reviewer. And if it is annoying, it's not good for you. So no need to write too much just for the sake of filling gaps. And conversely, if you write something which is too short, if you are too concise, you might need to bring some more flesh to develop some of your ideas beyond the mere title. And this is, I think, an important thing. Plus, something I mentioned on my first session. Of course, language is important. If the written language is not good enough, then it's annoying. I'm saying this, and again, I'm not the best person for it. When I defended my own PhD, I edited it myself, and in so doing, I was like every student. I underestimated the amount of work this would require, editing my own work. I did it. My supervisor told me it would take me at least 1 month. I thought, yeah, okay, as if. And I did it, I think, in 1 or 2 weeks. And I probably missed most of what needed to be fixed. And in the reports I received from my reviewers, there were comments on the need for edits, saying, "Oh, it's quite annoying seeing so many typos, etc." Yes, there were many typos. That's true. And I had similar comments for my habilitation. I had read it, proofread it, edited it many times, and there were still typos. And again, this was mentioned by reviewers, which is never helpful. So this means when I speak of it, I know what I'm speaking about, as I was one of you, underestimating this necessity, underestimating the amount of work, and then having the unpleasant surprise of being told off for it. So this is, I think, for preparing for the Viva, the most important things I wanted to share with you for today. But again, if there are more questions, we'll still have a bit of time for more questions, remarks, or whatsoever. And so I am so some of you who I suppose have been here from day one know what the purpose of this channel is. I decided to launch this Twitch channel some time ago, but eventually launched it 2 weeks ago, because I'm convinced that students, so master's students, but also doctoral students, need a forum where they can share their concerns in a relaxed environment, where they can ask questions anonymously. So here, of course, there are a few names that are familiar to me, but had you chosen a pseudonym rather than your real name, I would not have known who you are. And you can ask your questions, you can share your experience with others, and you can go to your to the end of your research journey pretty relieved, pretty relaxed. So this was the thing. Then why did I launch it at this time of the year? Why in the middle of August, when everybody's on holiday? I would say precisely because everybody's on holiday. This means, and in the first place, supervisors are on holiday. And I know, so again, of my own experience, I know that many students are really feeling lonely in the middle of summer, when they need advice, when they need feedback on their work, when they need to feel that they're supported when they prepare for the finishing line, the writing up, editing, preparing for Viva, etc. Then why have I chosen Twitch? I chose Twitch because it is a community I really like. So I've not been on Twitch even as a viewer for a long time, but I really like the dynamics and the vibes. So there are very good vibes. It's a community of passionate people who share their passion, their interest with others. So you've got many gamers who share their best games, who share their tips with other viewers. You have people sharing their experience at geopolitics, at law, and there are few people dealing with educational matters, although there are many students here. So I decided to go for Twitch for those reasons, and I've been feeling very welcome here by other streamers who contacted me on X or Instagram, and I'm very thankful for them. I do not know if any of you is here tonight, but if yes, so thank you, and you will recognize yourselves. No, it's a very, very, very pleasant place to be for me, and and I really hope all this is helpful for you. And if it is, do not hesitate to speak about it with other friends you might have, or if you are educators with students of yours. So my intention is to be here every Saturday at the same time in English, and every Sunday at the same time in French for a French audience. The videos are then available for replay on the platform for 1 or 2 weeks, and I upload them on YouTube. Last week I had an issue with one, so I only uploaded the English version, but my intention is also to upload them on YouTube, so they are available for longer. And each week I'm intending to address something which is, I think, relevant for master's students, for doctoral students, perhaps for other students at this particular time of the year. So if you are still students, or if you know people who are students, do not hesitate to direct them to my channel. They can message me, they can suggest themes, topics they want me to cover. I'm more than happy to. It's also supposed to be a conversation where you interact through the chat, and I'm supposed to react and respond based on what is in the chat. So it's not supposed to be a lecture. It is not exactly a webinar. It's not meant to be a traditional thing. It's meant to be casual and helpful, and as pleasant as possible. So here it was about 1 hour and a half, nearly the length of a film. It was your Saturday night film, I suppose. So I wish you a very good evening, and I'll see you next week. For those of you who attend, and like I said, if you have anyone around you who's a student who might have questions, or a prospective student willing to have a couple of things discussed here, please let them know that I'm here, and please direct them to me. So even when I'm offline, I'm more than happy to take questions to help, and then also to feed the discussion for upcoming sessions. So again, thank you very, very much. I wish you a lovely evening. Okay, great, Fuad Peter. If it was helpful, that's great. And so I wish you a lovely week, and I hope to see you soon. Bye to all.